Few things in golf feel better than a high spinning wedge shot that lands on the green, hops once, and then stops dead, or even manages to spin back. And in this video, along with our good friends at HackMotion, we are going to talk about how you can deliver wedges into impact over pitching distances to maximize the amount of spin that you can get on these shots. Now, top professionals manage to create a large amount of backspin at the point of impact, not because they're doing anything crazy, they're just creating the right conditions to enable that ball to start spinning. Now, the first place that we're going to start is talking about spin loft. Now, spin loft is the difference between your dynamic loft, so the amount of loft which is presented at the point of impact, and your angle of attack, so the amount that your club is moving down, level, or up through the point of impact. Now, the larger the difference between the angle of attack and the dynamic loft, the more spin you will be able to create up until a point. And that is down to something called friction. For example, if I present a dynamic loft of 30 degrees at the point of impact and my angle of attack is 5 degrees down, that is going to give me a spin loft of 35 degrees. Now, according to research, that is in the optimal window to produce backspin. Now, to put this in perspective, PGA professionals usually present between 30 and 36 degrees of dynamic loft at the point of impact. And using a 56 degree wedge, that is going to produce about 9,000 to 11,000 revs of backspin. And that is on a 70 to 90 yard shot. Now, the studies also show that if that loft threshold goes over the 45 degree to 50 degree threshold, the ball will start to lose friction with the club face as it just slides nearer the top. Now, you may think, well, Pete, this is very interesting. I feel I'm learning something as I watch this video, but how the hell is that going to help me actually hit better wedge shots? Well, most of the amateurs that I've coached struggle with two main areas when trying to generate spin on these types of shots. Either they are producing too much dynamic loft at the point of impact. Usually that will manifest itself in the club head overtaking the hands and presenting too much loft as we hit the ball. Or they get too steep, coming down in this fashion, and they don't present enough loft, digging often into the ground before impact. So let's get into some of the things that you need to be working on. First of all, how can you create this nice spinny setup? Now, the distances that we're going to be working on here, I've got a 70-yard example, but you can use this type of setup depending on the club that you're using, from about 50 up to around 90 yards. Anything beyond that, for the general golfer watching this, that's moving into the realms of a nice full swing where a few things might be different. However, a lot of the things that we're talking about at impact will remain consistent throughout every wedge shot that you hit. Maybe just stance width, ball positions, and a few things might change. So as mentioned, I've got a lob wedge here, and I'm starting with the ball position bang in the middle of my stance. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a touch of shaft lean. So you can see here how my shaft is perpendicular to the floor. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to move the handle so it's pretty much opposite my left thigh. So just adding in that slight amount of shaft lean. Now, if I can maintain that angle at the point of impact, I know that my hands will have arrived ahead of the ball, and that will help with a slightly descending blow. And I'm also going to place just a touch of weight onto my front foot here. So I've gone from about 50% distribution between either foot, and I'm going to put about 70% on my left side. Coupled with the slight shaft lean, this is going to enable me again just to have that slightly descending blow into impact. Now, club face wise, I am just going to be aiming pretty much straight down my target. If you open up the club a little bit, you can increase the amount of loft which can be applied at impact, and you can also help increase the amount of bounce presented at the point of impact. But if you are a little bit unsure about these things, just a nice square setup is fine. Now, I'm really happy to be partnered with HackMotion, and I'll talk you through some of the data that we're gathering during the session. If you do want more information, make sure that you head down into the description below where we have a link and you can explore exactly what this device offers. But for me, it's absolutely essential to understand what is happening with the wrist at the point of impact. Now, what I'm going to show you here is how you can keep a little bit of that shaft lean, how you can hit the ball first and the turf and try and avoid those fat and those thin shots. I'm going to explain through the numbers and then how you can apply them to your game. So I've been gathering data, I've been doing a little bit of exaggeration as well, but what I'm going to do here is click on this impact tab, which is measuring my lead wrist angle at the point of impact. Now you can see here that the benchmark on a PGA Tour for this distance is +7. Now that is +7, that means extension of the wrist. So if you have a look at the lead wrist, if I move it in this direction, this is called flexion. It's also known as bowing the wrist. Now this gives a minus figure. So you can see here that this is -51 in flexion. It's quite a lot, full on Dustin Johnson. Now the opposite of this is extension. So you have flexion and then you have extension. And it's this movement as you come through the ball that allows the club to move in this direction here. Now you may expect with tour professionals as they get set up that they get their hands massively ahead of impact, that they strike down really aggressively. What the data actually shows is, coupled with this setup of the ball center, hands slightly ahead, is that the club moves on an angle of attack which is slightly down, so it's moving in this direction, but rather than holding this wrist in flexion, it actually moves to extension coming through the point of impact. Now what this allows is a slightly downward angle of attack, and then it also allows loft to be presented at the point of impact. And this is where we go back to that spin loft discussion that we had at the start. So what I'm going to try and work on here with this shot is coming into impact, and actually rather than holding my wrist in flexion, I'm going to allow it to extend, or I'm going to allow that club head to release past my hands a little bit. That's a good strike. Oh, that's a good strike. Ah, man! So my result at impact there, my lead wrist, 9 degrees in flexion. Now in reality, we're talking that being here, and I'm trying to get it to +7, which is there. So it kind of shows you the margins that we're working with. But come on, let's get it back. So it's here, just allow that wrist to come through and extend. Oh, it's close. Oh, God, yes, So my impact there was -1. -1, so 8 degrees too flexed. So 9 degrees too flexed at the top, a little bit addressed. So I'm getting closer, and the numbers actually pretty impressive on that. So the spin up around 9,000, carry 70 yards, so pretty much bang on. It's a very strange feeling, even for me. Like, I've been obviously playing a long time, but the tendency to try and hold this angle rather than just let that club release up and through. So we know the type of feeling that we want to have at the point of impact. But what are some of the other things that you can implement into your technique to try and better deliver that club? Well, first of all, we've spoken about the setup. Now with the takeaway, the player that I'm going to focus on here is Jason Day. Now Jason Day, with his pitching technique, he's quite extreme in some examples, but certainly not out of the ordinary when you watch the guys on tour. Now his takeaway for these short type of pitch shots, you'll see him turn his body and actually have very little wrist hinge, very little wrist movement. He keeps his hands locked out of the technique and he uses his body to pivot the action. Now by using the body and trying to isolate the hands and the arms, what Jason Day can do, he can turn back, he can turn through, and he can deliver the club on a little bit more of a shallower angle of attack. Now he still strikes down, but he doesn't take huge divots. He just brushes the ground after the golf ball. Remember, we don't really want to be hitting up on these shots. We still want to be catching the ball first and then the turf. So I've got my hands just slightly ahead of the ball. I'm going to turn my body back and through that weight distribution on the front foot here. Rotate it through. Oh, I am generating a lovely amount of friction on these shots. A tidbit here, when you strike your wedges, you do want to have this impact around this area here. As soon as it starts to drift up the club face, that's when you're not going to get the friction. You want to hit it slightly lower here to encourage the spin. Also, if you use the body to power this technique, you can neutralize the path into the ball. When you're trying to generate large amounts of spin, it's not the best idea to be moving this way too much or coming too far from the inside. You can certainly hit different types of shots with different paths, but if we're looking to just generate a nice consistent amount of spin over this type of distance, just turning the body back and turning the body through should allow that club to be delivered on quite a neutral path. So not over the top, not too inside, just nice and neutral. Now to finish up, if you want to try and generate a maximum amount of backspin, there's a couple of other things you need to be aware of. Try and keep your grooves nice and clean. Now the grooves themselves don't actually encourage that much backspin. What the grooves do is channel away moisture, channel away dirt from the point of impact. And if they're clogged up, that doesn't happen, so you will lose friction. Also, try and use a nice premium golf ball with a soft cover. That is going to allow you to, again, generate that friction, generate that backspin. All right, guys, just want to say a huge thank you for watching. Massive thank you for HackMotion for partnering with the channel as well. As mentioned, if you do want a little bit more information, head down into the description below. Now, if you want to continue your swing quest and keep improving, check out these videos here.